Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Silmarillion Film Project. This is session number 22 of Season 7. I am Corey Olsen, the Tolkien Professor, joined by Nick and Marie from the Writer's Room as we prepare to discuss Episode 7 of Season 7. We are coming towards the middle of the season. Episode 7 is the second half of the summit meeting to where the Union of Maedhros is being first pitched in episode 6 and planned in episode 7. And in fact, the cool reveal in this episode, my favorite thing, is when the name of the battle is prophetically applied to it. That was pretty cool. Like a foreboding foretelling of unnumbered tears to come was really cool. So we will discuss the prophecy of the unnumbered tears, which is going to proactively give this battle its name eventually. But and of course, in less depressing news, it's the episode of Young Love as well. So we get cute dating sequences as well. So this episode has something for the whole family. It really does. So all right, before we dig into it, first a reminder that we are in the midst of Signum University's annual fundraising drive. And as always, I want to extend gratitude to all of the folks, the hundreds of people who donate to help support Signum University, without whom we could not exist. I encourage you to go to signumuniversity.org/donate and make your tax-deductible donation, he says, as we start moving through December towards the end of the American tax year. Do remember Signum University when you have that conversation with your tax attorney here in the month of December. But also, we have our Anytime Audit holiday special going on. So you can gift the joy of learning. You can purchase a gift certificate for one of our Anytime Audits, which is our lecture packs, our lecture sets, recorded lecture series from our graduate courses. And you can get those for, you can get a gift certificate for $75 for the lecture set of the course of your choice, which you can give as a gift. These have been very popular gifts around the Signum community for many, many years. So I encourage you to look into those. $75 for a holiday gift certificate for our Anytime Audit program. And of course, we are beginning to look forward to the spring moot season, which begins right off in January, when we have in January not the spring moot season, but the summer moot season down in Melbourne, Australia, in the midst of the summer break down there, January 24th through 26th, Osmoot. On the Music of Words, though I understand, despite the title, The Music of Words, I understand that there will be some things other than rap music discussed at this moot. So is what I understand. Though I certainly plan to discuss rap music at this moot. But anyway, so we're having Osmoot in January, and then Sunshine Moot in February down in Orlando, Florida, on the 22nd of February. And then SoCal Moot, March 15th, Tex Moot, April 5th, down in Houston, and then back to Europe, April 26th in Leuven, Belgium. We'll be having Willow Moot, our first ever moot in Belgium, and our third moot on the continent, the European continent here. So that'll be great fun. Good to connect with folks back in Europe again at Willow Moot, and with my good friends down in Australia for Osmoot. That's always a highlight of the year too. And of course, any of these moots you can also join us remotely for as well. And there will be some other fall moots that will be coming as well. We don't yet have the announcements for any of our May moots, but I think we may have a couple May moots coming down the pike. So there's May is I think going to be a busy time as well. We're looking at a couple things that might settle down into the May calendar here too. So, all right. But let us get back to episode 7. So we're going to be talking geography today. Of course, we're at Tolsirian today. And the discussion of how do we get through and around Tarnufuan is one of the things that's going to be coming up in the summit here today. But the first thing before we get involved in the plot, I do want to mention, as Marie has installed reminders here, casting nominations are open. So in season 7, so if you go to, so people can find that, right, by going to the forums.signumuniversity.org, go to Film Film Project, and then, is it casting from there?
Casting.
Yeah. So there's a casting sub-forum under Film Film Project, and then casting season 7, and then you can make nominations there.
And there will be a link in the chat momentarily.
Yeah, so it's season 7 nominations is its own sub-forum.
Yeah, that's it. So, and for a preview, what characters are we casting in season 7?
Well, our humans.
All the humans, right. We need Olfast and
right. So we have
all of our Easterlings, yeah.
And Hurin and Huor and Rhiannon and Morwen, obviously also. And a couple of elves, the ones who are in this episode. So Gwindor and Finduilas haven't been cast yet in Film.
Gwindor and Finduilas haven't been cast yet? Why did I think they had?
We specifically saved them.
We saved them. Right? Well, because Finduilas has been on the, outskirts for a while.
Right.
She's been...
We've been delaying casting her, and now we're casting her.
It's time. Okay. Yeah. It's time.
Yeah, so we do have a couple elves and then a couple dwarves as well. And... but yeah, mostly the humans. Saruman. Saruman is on the list.
Oh.
From the frame.
Of course, because we're doing the White Council. So, and we had Galadriel and we have Gandalf and we, and we have Círdan. So,
Gwindor has existed as a character in some films since season 5. So, but as Marie says, like his role was
tiny,
minimal,
and this has happened many times before when we have somebody who makes like a almost cameo appearance, or he's like in the chorus or something, but it's not his moment yet, and we wait until the moment to really think about it.
We tried to only cast characters who appear in more than one episode with speaking roles within the season. So if it's only in a single episode, we don't usually put them on the casting list.
Like Glorfindel was a member of the cast in season 2. And I don't think that he was cast. I don't even know if he is cast now, but he certainly wasn't cast until like season 4.
Right.
Yeah. We needed Glorfindel for the frame.
For the
for the Gondolin, the establishment of Gondolin. Yeah. Right. Because he was with Turgon on the dream trip and everything with the
and he was on the Helcaraxa as well.
So. Right. Yeah.
Again, with a character who
one of the guys pulling Turgon out of the ice.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Anyway, all right. So that'll be cool. That'll be fun. A lot of big focus on the Empire of Bree, and then we'll be doing the pre-casting episode soon, right?
Yeah. So we'll get the nominations, and once we have enough, we can open for voting, and then we'll do our casting episode. Right. So we'll see how the nominations go and how the schedule works. So I have a tentative plan for when it's going to be, but we'll see what happens.
We'll see. Yeah, the schedule is always subject to change.
Participation.
Yes.
But there's already some nominations posted on the forum, so
cool.
It's off to a good start.
Yeah. I don't know if Steve H is here, but if he is, his pick for Ulfang is I'm here for it, man. He is here. Yep.
Excellent.
I'm all in on that one. That one's good.
And ideally, we'll have at least 3 options for each character we want to cast, so that people have some choices to make.
Cool.
We'll see how this all goes.
Good. Excellent. All right. Okay, so as for episode 7 itself, so episode 7 we don't have a full script for. We're working off the outline for episode 7, so there's a lot of kind of fleshing out questions that I know I'm going to have here for that reason, just to kind of ask you guys to kind of walk me through a little bit more of how you guys were thinking of handling this, or what kinds of things you would be expecting to kind of bring out during the course of a full script on this. I was really interested in the choice of Gwindor as the sort of the primary focal point of this episode. That seems portentous for one thing, but also a really good way to highlight not only because that was the thing that was in a sense most unexpected about episode 7 is that the whole situation, like the summit situation where everyone's gathering together and they're pitching the Union and what's going to happen, seems like the focus kind of ought to be or would be expected to be on the big picture politics, right? And of course many of those things do come out, like there are several heart-to-heart conversations about Doriath and its role and all that kind of thing, right? And its politics, but yet this episode really has, dominant might be a slightly strong word, but a very strong focus on the personal implications of the battle, not just the bigger political ones. So the choice of Gwindor was really interesting on that level as well. He's a conspicuous character, even from the political standpoint, right? Because he's the one who is kind of, well, again, rebelling is a strong word, but deviating from the political stance of his lord, basically in that situation. He's conscientiously objecting to the stance of Orodreth and choosing to go along.
He's conscientiously objecting to not being in a war.
Exactly, right. Yes. Yeah. You could argue he's doing conscientious objecting wrong, but there it is. He's doing it differently in any case. Yeah.
I actually think that's very appropriate, though. I think that is an appropriate use of the term, even though it is the opposite of the way we think of it.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's kind of like young people joining the Spanish Civil War in the 30s.
Right. Right. Or even like young American pilots going over and flying in World War I before America joined.
Yeah. Or World War II, in fact, in China. And my great-grandfather on my mother's side jumped the border into Canada so he could get in on World War I earlier. Mm-hmm. He's the one that's from this area, from here in Central Virginia. My great-grandfather, who was in Italy at the time, when he was put on the front lines of the Italian army, he laced up his boots too tight so his feet would swell and they'd send him back. Very different ways of thinking about it.
Very different ways of thinking about it. Yeah. So, okay, so I was about to say, but Gwindor is a fascinating character for these reasons, because he's really focusing on him is a great way to bring out the why fight or to not fight or
right.
Yeah.
We wanted to focus on a character who still had choices to make, and many of the other characters are very much decided at this point.
Yeah.
So by focusing on Gwindor, we get to continue to tease out some questions that we would not if we had chosen a different point of view character.
Yeah, focus on the drama of that choice, because as you say, there aren't that many people who are agonizing over what to do, and they might be agonizing for other reasons, but they're not agonizing about what to do in the same way. Right. And I agree with Mrs. Manrique. This is one of those things. There are several great pleasures to doing a fill in the gaps adaptation like Silm Film. Right. One of them is to play that long game and set up, to do things in the depiction of the Silmarillion material, which sets up stuff from the Lord of the Rings later on and brings out those connections in really fun ways. That's one very great pleasure of doing this. But another one is, as she is suggesting, getting to show a thing that we're left only to imagine in the text. In this case, as she says, I would just love to see Gwindor so full of life and fire, tears and passion and red cheeks and love for his brothers in arms, in contrast heavily to his later degradation, yet increased gravity and wisdom. Yes, we only ever meet Gwindor post, after his imprisonment, and we're told that he is very different than he was before, but we've never met him before, really. We saw him act
in the battle,
in the Nearnath, right? But we didn't really know him as a character.
We're just asked to kind of draw some conclusions about who this guy is.
Yeah,
and I think that just the sort of the kind of passionate individual that Mrs. Malric is describing is the sort of person who would be in this kind of like push and pull between love and duty, right? Like it's that's an oversimplification for sure.
Well, especially since the question of the duty is particularly dubious,
because both of those issues are very thorny. Because he's torn between the love for Finduilas and the love for Gwilyn on one hand, and on the other hand, his duty to Orodreth and his duty to Gwilyn, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But one of our kind of stated goals coming into this season has been to personalize this war, because there's this big temptation to really focus on the big picture events.
Yeah.
And as you alluded to earlier, the politics involved, and that's all part of the story for sure. But it was really important to show what this cost to people.
Yes.
For everybody to understand what's been lost when it's over.
Yes. It's true. One of the things, the Silmarillion, I don't know if you know, I will say this despite the fact that I know that this is like a sound clip that could be clipped out of context and used against me, but I'll say it anyway. The Silmarillion is a much more powerful story than it seems like it ought to be.
Yes.
When you think about the way the Silmarillion is told, the perspective from which it's told, the genre of like plot summary of like historical events and things shouldn't be as moving as it is, right? And when I think about the Nearnath Arnuidiad, there are so many ways in which the story as written in the published Silmarillion just kind of like asks us to feel and appreciate the grief and suffering of that. And yet it hasn't done the kind of work that like a novel would do to set that up. Right.
Right.
If you're reading a war novel, right, and you like get to know many characters along the way, and then 3/4 of them die, at the end of the book or something, like now, like we're, but that's not how the Silmarillion functions, right? It's just not that kind of a story. But yeah, so how to capture what we are told, and what I don't have any problem investing in it imaginatively, like that the suffering was horrible, right?
Yeah, I mean, it does work.
It works. It does work.
Sure.
Trying to figure out how and why it works is tricky, because it's like, this shouldn't.
It shouldn't work. In some ways, it feels like it shouldn't work, right? Like it's yeah. But anyway, so that's obviously one of the things when we're thinking about planning an adaptation of this. It's like, how do we're changing the mode, right? Because the kind of storytelling that we're doing is much closer storytelling. We're not doing the summary from 10,000 feet narrative approach that the Silmarillion does during a very large, not all, but a very large percentage of the text. But obviously we want to be true to the, to think about ways in which our adaptation is going to be able to evoke those same kinds of feelings. And yeah, exactly as you were saying, Nick, to personalize it, to really help to show the charge of Gwindor in the book is evocative because of the way his own motivations for it is. Like the scene with him witnessing the dismemberment of his brother, right? For instance, like that evokes our imagination, and we can feel Gwindor's rage and outrage, while at the same time seeing the disaster, right, that is being caused by his charge. And yet, all of that is accomplished having never met Gwindor ever before, like learning that he exists as a character literally in the paragraph where that momentous event occurs, right? And so to be able to layer on top of that this backstory with Finduilas, again, a backstory which the Silmarillion will later tell us happened, right? We know there was something between him and Finduilas, though exactly how that worked and what happened there isn't spelled out. Anyway, I think this is a really fun approach.
I think that so on one hand, he's really, really dialed into what makes like the stories that we already know, right? The Silmarillion works because there is so much being invoked, right? That's doing some of the heavy lifting there, and it kind of makes me wonder if the people who don't enjoy the Silmarillion, if part of that is just there are gaps in their cultural experience that don't allow them to draw those connections and those parallels. I mean, sure, getting through the Aino Lindale and the Valaquenta is difficult, and sure, not everybody's as fascinated by ancient geopolitics as I am, and finds the of Valerian and its realms chapter quite so fascinating.
Yes.
So there's those things, but I'll tell you, here's a good example from recent memory that it has nothing to do with our adaptation. I never grasped the Tom Bombadil songs until I heard them being sung.
Mm-hmm. And
all of a sudden, this wave of connection between me and Tom Bombadil occurred that had never existed before. I always found the character interesting and enjoyable, and I missed him when he wasn't in the film, right? In 2000,
in the Jackson film, yeah.
It's one of the reasons why 20-year-old me walked out of the 19-year-old me walked out of the movie theater in a huff. Right. right. But all of a sudden putting that song to music, or those songs more appropriately, changed the way that I connected to that character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I think adaptation does incredibly well. Is it almost it does tend to flatten some things out, for sure, depending on which adaptation you're looking at and how that adaptation is performed. But it has a way of drawing you closer to things that are part of someone else's experience in the story that you didn't know were there. Anyway, that's my pro adaptation rant for the evening.
Yeah. So let's focus for a second just on the Gwindor and Finduilas story then, as the kind of epicenter of this, and then we'll work out from there. Last time in it was the previous session of Film in which we discussed episode 6. In real time, it's been several weeks, so I've already forgotten it. Gwindor commits to going. Like Gwindor makes the preliminary decision that Ordreth says no. I remember that.
Right. So Ordreth says no,
Yeah.
And so I'm going to pack up and go home now because I'm not part of this.
Yeah.
And Gwindor's like, well, can I stay though?
Right.
So that can I stay though is him pretty strongly saying he wants to commit to this.
Right.
Um, and he has at least tacit permission from Orodreth to be doing this.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I know we spent last time a lot of time talking about Orodreth and Orodreth's character and how to handle that. Orodreth is gone now. He's left.
So now he's gone and Gwindor's still there.
Yeah.
And when Gwindor decided, oh, I'm staying, Finduilas had some thoughts about that too.
Right. She's like, I guess I'm staying too, you know, or like, yeah, I got to look after
then
this.
I have to stay too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so she came up with her own reason to stay.
So, which are also to help Brundir, right?
Yes.
So she is the primary physician to I was about to say baby. I'll still call him Baby Brundir because it's more fun to say, even though he's not a baby technically. But he's
alliteration is always more fun.
It is always more fun,
especially when it's triple alliteration
exactly.
because of the double of one word.
Exactly. Yeah. So she is tending Baby Brundir, and that's her sort of official reason to stay.
Yeah. But she volunteered for that task.
Right.
Because she has some things to
she
say
sees
to
there's trouble brewing, right?
Yeah.
So describe what you see as the arc of their encounter, like within this episode, right? How do you see their arc going?
So, unfortunately for them, they're having a lot of difficulty communicating with each other. Possibly because they don't actually understand their own motivations entirely. And so there's a bit of talking past each other and minimizing the other person's viewpoint, but not maliciously, just by misunderstanding what's involved.
Right.
So their arc is not like this nice clear arc of here's where we start and there's where we go and this is how we end. It's more of the, what are you doing? I don't know. You should be doing this other thing instead. Well, that sounds terrible. So like there's just this start, stop to them. It doesn't really feel very smooth and continuous because it's not. It's a fractured relationship.
So the situation is basically over the course of this episode, they are coming to understand or recognize how fractured their relationship already is.
Basically.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
And
because while they were still going in the same direction for eternity, presumably,
right,
there was no need for a heightened level of communication. It was just easy. This is the way things are going to be.
Mm-hmm. So
then the story becomes, what are they going to do about this?
Right. Well, but I was going to say, so he's the one who's changed?
Yes. But really, he hasn't, is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part where they've had poor communication prior to this, because she has pretty consistently been like, no, I don't want you to do these like dangerous, scary things. And at least in the past, he's either agreed with her or at least gone along with it, in the sense that he sure did not go with Finrod on that reckless quest. So they were in agreement there. He didn't go with Finrod. And that's what she wanted him to do, was not go.
She wanted him not to go, and he didn't go.
Right. But did they really agree, or what were their reasonings? They didn't necessarily get to a point of understanding one another.
Right.
They just made a decision where they both decided the same thing.
He sacrificed his desire and what he felt he should do for peace in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't necessarily something he really wanted to do.
Right. Right.
So he was okay with making
it wasn't
that
a huge
sacrifice.
sacrifice in that sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's still wasn't necessarily the choice he would have made on his own.
Right.
But that happened. Now he's realizing that if he sacrifices this, it's a betrayal of his brother.
Right.
And that is not something he's willing to do or to give up.
Certainly
to keep
not
the
as
peace.
easily.
Yeah, not to keep the peace, not to make her happy so that she doesn't have to worry about his safety. So he's like, you don't have enough of an argument to stop me from doing this, is basically his viewpoint in the end. So she kind of ups the ante and keeps trying to say, like, no, my argument is actually quite serious. So she's trying to impress upon him how important this is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, since we all know what's going to happen, she's not wrong.
Right.
She's
But-
not wrong, but the way that she's communicating things, because she's not being entirely honest about her motives, it encourages him to not take her foreboding as what it is.
So, what are her motives exactly?
Well, they are mixed. She does have apparently some true foresight in the
Right.
situation to know.
She's the one
that-
who prophesies the unnumbered tears. I love
Right.
that. I love
Right.
that.
So her prophecy, or this is what's going to happen, is that if he goes unnumbered tears, right? Like, it's going to be doom for everyone if Gwindor goes to the battle. Again,
Not wrong.
she's not wrong there.
Yeah.
However, what he hears is, you're trying to scare me out of this, convince me out of this, because you don't want me to go and get killed. And, going and getting killed in a battle is something everyone involved in this has to risk. Like, I'm not special here.
Yes. Well,
So-
because exactly, I mean, that kind of an argument is both simultaneously perfectly understandable, like that she would feel that way, but also, like, yeah, it's not by itself a very honorable reason to not go,
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so he thinks that her foreboding is for his own personal
Safety.
safety and well-being, and
And
he's
that
like,
she
"Look,"
might be being a little hyperbolic about the rest.
Yeah.
right. So he's like, you know what? I am willing to risk my life to, stand up for what I think needs to
Sure.
happen. And,
Sure.
especially with his brother being an Angband and all that.
Yeah.
But he doesn't recognize the whole fate's worse than death thing,
Mm.
and that when she says doom for everyone, she doesn't just mean him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he's really seeing this as I could not love thee half so much had loved I not honor more situation.
Yes. Yes.
And she's telling him, dude, that's super not it.
Yeah. Yes.
But he doesn't hear that, and so either she fails to explain it to him, or the reason she can't be convincing is that at the end of the day, she doesn't want him to go because it's scary, and she doesn't want her boyfriend to get killed,
Right.
and that's not absent from what she's saying. And he knows that. He can
Right.
see that and hear that in everything she's saying, and he's kind of like, I can't make a decision based on that. I'm sorry you don't want me to go off and do scary things, but sometimes I gotta.
Right. And we know that he has to go because, he does.
It's what happens. Yeah. But no, the thing that is really interesting about this situation, by which I mean specifically the Gwindor Finduilas relationship, is there are not very many examples. I'm trying to think of another one. Is there another example of an elf couple who had gone as far as engagement and broken it off?
No.
Finrod and Amarie.
Oh yeah.
We
Well,
hear
that's-
about that, but
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
And though they broke it off in the sense that he went to Middle Earth and she didn't, but then he dies and goes back to Valinor, and presumably they're together because
Yeah.
in at least the version, not that Christopher used, but just the version, he walked with his father and Amarie.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Presumably they got back together.
It was more of
Delayed.
Yeah, exactly. It was one of those elvish, let's do different things for a few centuries, like I'll go to Middle Earth and you'll stay here in Valinor. It's a slightly longer term version of that. But again, it's not like they had a breakup scene, as far as we know, right? And certainly his actions, which are all we see in the book, right? Him still, I mean, like, he's not like in the market, in Middle Earth. Like, he still considers himself, yeah.
He considers himself taken.
Exactly. So in that sense, they didn't break up. As far as he's concerned. As far as he's concerned, yeah. We don't know what she's up to over there, but
well, I think in one of the things that we're showing here is that in his mind, now what we've done in making her kind of state the breakup up front before he even goes, that alleviates a lot of the things that don't make her look particularly good
later on.
Yes. Right? Yeah, it doesn't alleviate them entirely, but alleviates them a little.
Yes. Having them have an actual solid, firm breakup.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that we're also showing in this episode that in his heart of hearts, he thinks that when he comes back, that they're going to figure it out.
Right.
It never occurs to him that this is like, she's going to see. When this is all over, I'll come back and everything's going to be fine. And I'm not convinced that it would have been.
Yeah.
Even if he had just come back.
Right. Or even if he'd come back victorious and unchanged.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he still would have ignored what she was trying to tell him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, as I said, I mean, it's, whenever I make an always/never statement, I always pause because I'm sure I'm forgetting something. But it's not. This is a very unusual story in that sense, and so it makes a lot of sense for us to kind of lean into that and say, what does it look like? Like, what does it take? What does it take for?
It's not as weird as the love triangle between Celebrimbor, Galadriel, and Celeborn that never was. But it's definitely weird.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's also not as weird as Finwë, Muriel, and Ingwe.
Nothing's as weird as that, but
not Ingwe.
But Amroth and Nimrodel also have a relationship that doesn't go anywhere, but it's not really the same.
No, especially since with the way that ends with death as well. I mean, it's
Ignor and Andreth.
Yeah, not that. Different categories in a couple ways, but again, that's still. But both of those are like one-sided, or like the romances that don't happen, right? Not romances that get broken off, which is
right. To break off an engagement
is a huge deal.
Seems pretty serious, and it seems like elves have a pretty good sense of who the other person is most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily always. But enough that, like, if they get to the point of engagement, you're thinking, okay, they've made a choice, and this is for life and all that. So
eternity, in fact.
Yeah, well, life and life being quite a long time. Yeah,
exactly. The life of Arda.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Till apocalypse do us part.
I mean, there's a reason why all the oaths the Tolkien writes are till world's ending.
Yes.
Yes. Tenambar Meta is how you swear an oath.
Yes. I remember being so struck by that as a child with Pippin's oath, right? In Minas Tirith, like how it ends, like until my Lord release me or the world end, and I'm like, well, okay, I guess that covers it, right? I wouldn't have thought of that clause, right? To throw that in there, but then of course, you come to see where that comes from and why they would in Gondor have thought that way. No, that's cool. Okay, so, and now on to this. Okay, hang on. No, more on this. So, what is the cause then of the miscommunication? Where where did they fail to get to that point? Like, I understand how they're misunderstanding each other, but I guess I don't fully understand why they're misunderstanding each other, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. So I think that there's history here, right? And presumably they had a similar conversation / disagreement over the Finrod situation. And all we know about Gwindor prior to that is that he and his brother fought in the Dagger Bragollach with Finrod. So he was one of Finrod's guys, and then he doesn't go with him, and then Finrod is killed. So I think that while they reached an agreement on some surface level about, I don't need to be part of this whole quest for Silmarils thing, afterwards, Gwindor feels like he failed. He did something wrong because Finrod and all the guys who went with him died. And Gwindor is still alive.
So it's a survivor's guilt thing.
He's got the survivor's guilt thing
Doubly.
for both his brother in Angband and now for Finrod's death. So he's feeling like he's compromising too much of who he should be to keep her happy. And that builds resentment. So even if he's agreed in their conversations, in his heart, he's not. And he's starting to resent this request that she's putting on him. But he's not saying any of that to her, so she doesn't understand why suddenly he feels differently. What changed? Like, so there's that. If you can't be true about your own viewpoint, how can you convey to someone else? So his survivor's guilt, resentment is building. Her genuine fear for his safety and not wanting him to run off and do dangerous things is not something she's admitting to at any point in any of these conversations.
Right.
She's just saying, I, think that this would be terrible, so you shouldn't be part of it.
Yeah.
And he's like, cool, but you really just don't want me to do the dangerous thing.
Right.
So he sees what she's not saying and therefore mistrusts what she is saying. And she won't admit what she's not saying.
Right. Also, I think that, and we haven't established this, I think, to any serious degree. I think that when she was talking to him about not going with Finrod, I don't think that it was foreboding. I think she just thought, like, this is crazy.
Just don't do that.
Just don't do it.
That seems like a crazy thing to do. Don't do that. And in some way, even though he may have agreed that that was a crazy thing to do, with this guilt that he's feeling, it might be easier to blame her than himself.
Again, it's resentment.
Now all of a sudden, when it's not enough for me to stop just because you don't want to, now all of a sudden you have this weird random foreboding that you can't give any kind of specifics about. That's what a foreboding is, by the way.
Right.
But it's the whole crying wolf thing. If she said, don't go the first time, and he's like, okay, I won't go. And then she's like, don't go the second time. He's like, okay, do you just always say don't go? Is that like your go-to
Is that
move
is that how this is always gonna go for the rest of
Yeah. So that's why he's not hearing her foreboding, because it's not the first time she said something like this.
Right.
But she's like, no, this time it's different.
Right. And like, she's gonna be in some way vindicated by Turin, because like, it's going to demonstrate it was the fact that you wanted to go off and heroically save your brother was not the problem. It wasn't just that I was anti-war or something like this. I just knew that it was going to go terribly. But did you really?
Right.
is kind of the way is his attitude about the whole thing.
So ultimately, the misunderstanding between them is sort of rooted in the fact that neither one of them fully understands themselves. Like, it's their own lack of self-awareness.
Yes.
And in a sense, ironically, almost that they each understand the other one better than they're understanding themselves.
In the exact wrong way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we wanted it to be a somewhat tragic misunderstanding in their relationship. We didn't want it to simply be a irreconcilable differences or a situational thing where one person thinks one thing but the other person really didn't mean that. Like we were trying to find a way in which they could both be sympathetic, and therefore we had to make her a little bit immature in how she handles her fears.
Yep.
And we needed to make him a little bit bad at listening.
Right.
Like, so they had to have some innate flaws, but understandable ones. Not like neither of them is maliciously going out of their way to sabotage anything. Like, it's not like that, but it's challenging. Could have handled this differently.
Yes, it's challenging to create a situation like this and try to have neither one of them actually be the bad guy.
Yes. Yeah. And
I mean, we were tempted to make her the bad guy, right?
Yeah.
There were,
that's the easy one, right?
Especially given what happens later. Yes.
And in the book, she's the bad guy. Like, that's just very clear. You know, like, she's fickle and.
Well, this is our opportunity to put some nuance into that interpretation of her story.
Yes.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't mind making her somewhat less mature than you might expect an elf of her age to be. She's not necessarily sheltered, but she's only had to deal with so many real decisions in her life.
Yep.
Most of what she's been involved in has simply been going along with her parents.
Yeah.
And this fits beautifully because if you think about it, Finduilas has been like the baby of the Noldor the whole time. I mean, like for years now, as we've been developing this, we talked about last time about Orodreth and Merrill, being the,
poster child,
the poster children of the new thing, right? Their youngest child she's like the youngest. Is there anyone younger of the elves that are characters?
Is she? I think she's older than Gil-galad in our story, isn't she?
Is she older than Gil-galad? I thought she was younger.
Yeah, we introduced her
establishing that, but
I feel like we introduced her at the very end of season 4.
Okay, so we had her be the first.
I thought she was their first child.
I was. See, in my imagination, she was the younger child.
And I can see how that might make more sense. Oh, well, not sure we did that.
Anyway.
Had we decided yet that Gil-galad was going to be her brother that early on?
Yes.
We
definitely did.
I was like...
Because at some point we forced...
the Orodreth origin
we
choice.
Forced the question. I feel like... we set up a script outline so that question had to be answered in order to determine whether or not the script outline worked, is how we managed to do that, as I recall.
Is that what we did? Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, what even if, but like in my head, she's always been the younger child. But so the point is they are still, like, Celebrimbor is the only other.
Orodreth's age.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're the children of Orodreth.
Yeah. So I mean, there is a very, when we talk about her being immature, there's no greater candidate for immaturity among all of the elves. I mean, she's the baby of the Noldor.
Not until Dior and Nimloth's kids are born, anyway.
Yeah, there you go. Like, there will be more. And Elrond, then little tiny, younger than everybody Elrond, right? The junior kid on the block. But the
Silmarillion, my family story.
Exactly.
Elrond.
Exactly.
How I got here.
Right. How I arrived at the last minute. But yeah, anyway, but for now, yeah. So again, I'm just saying, for me, that is an excellent explanation, immaturity. And also, as you say, again, from the Merith Adorthad on, there has been a sense almost of sheltering, about Orodreth's family. You know, they've not been involved in the wars. I mean, I know there was the incident with the necromancy and stuff. That was
There was that one time.
there was that one time in which they had a really bad night, right? You know,
Yes,
but
they had to evacuate a tower in the middle of the night because it was full of ghosts.
right, exactly, and that's, you know, that can be known to be a scarring experience. But the point is, like, they're not like Angrod and Etherlos, right? I mean, you know, like they've been sheltered, right? They've been sheltered from those kinds of experiences, from all that.
And again, you know, it's not that nothing bad has ever happened to her,
Right.
but the decision making she's had to do hasn't been adult decision making. It's been,
Yes.
I hang out with my family and do the things my family does. And
Yes.
so even if it is evacuating a tower in the middle of the night, she went with her parents.
Yes.
And did that. It wasn't like she had to organize the evacuation of the tower or something. So the level of responsibility put on her hasn't been very high. So it's been fairly light, and therefore she's childlike. So even if Gil-galad is younger than her in our version, which apparently he is, he has been ambassador to Doriath for a time now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's gotten his first real responsibility that required him to go
His
off
first
and do
real
things.
job. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that weren't, you know, exactly working for his parents.
Yeah.
Or so he's outside the family home and traveling a bit more and all that. So even him, he's got some other stuff going on in his life that might lead to a different reaction to a situation like this. So she just doesn't know how to react. And she's so concerned with making sure Gwindor does the right thing that she's not stopping to think about how she should go about convincing him. And she's willing to do some emotional manipulation kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, again, we didn't go too far down the road with that. We didn't want her to be like masterminding this thing where she was trying to control him.
Make it seem like she's an emotional abuser or something like
No,
that.
no.
But still, no, it's and
But the types of things that you go, ooh, that's not a good look for your relationship.
Yes. Well, but that's then when you take and you superimpose upon that the whole, like, and this is an elf relationship, right? You know, that there are some reasons to feel that, for her to feel that she can play these cards it's different. Like even, I don't know. I mean, it's the way that Tolkien describes the union of elves and their commitment to each other. One could understand in this basically hitherto unprecedented, at least in our storytelling experience, situation of a committed long-term elf relationship which is falling apart. One could understand her presumption that, like, what, she has the right to play certain cards or something. Like, she's assuming that he's going to go along with her wishes because elf husbands and wives who bind themselves to each other are supposed to be one-minded about these kinds of things, right? And they're not, and it's legitimately weird. It's legitimately unusual. And so all I'm saying is there seem to be differences in the circumstances which also make these moves, which are not great moves, a little bit more understandable for her to get herself in that frame of mind because of
and that's what we wanted, was just that someone could understand what she's doing and still be like, maybe a bad choice there, maybe you shouldn't have,
right,
but to understand and leave her sympathetic and not just be seeing her as, well, you're the villain and you're preventing him from doing what he's meant to do. Like, our goal was not to go in that direction with her.
Right.
So we were trying actively to go in different directions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So how do you see the balance between the personal drama of Gwindor and Finduilas and the political drama of so like Gwindor's choice, right? And the reasons why he goes along, like why he says, no, I'm definitely going. This needs not only to like play its role within the private drama of their relationship, but also to be mapping onto the larger. I mean, so in one sense, Gwindor is the greatest success of the summit meeting. In as much as the summit meeting was designed to recruit people to the cause, Gwindor is like one of the only positive outcomes that they have, frankly, right? I mean, and we'll get to talking about Beleg and Mablung, right? That's another situation. But still, like, on the one hand, when they're considering their new assets at the end, like Gwindor is one of the top of the list. Like, they didn't get Orodreth, they didn't get Nargothrond, but they got Gwindor, right? So Gwindor's choice is therefore
from Nargothrond, yeah.
Right. Gwindor's choice is therefore
significant.
It maps onto, especially choosing him as protagonist of this episode, facilitates helping the viewers to see, alongside Gwindor, yeah, I'm convinced. I think this is the right thing to do. I think we absolutely should do this. And Gwindor is one of the only spokespeople for that point of view. There are the people already convinced, there are the people not convinced, and there's Gwindor, right? Yeah. Again, there's the Doriath people, which I don't want to just shove aside. But again, he's the center. So that's why I like having him, not only for the personal reasons, but for the political ones as the centerpiece there.
Well, and the people of Mithram and even Dorloman are not a monolith.
Right.
So Gwindor is, in a sense, a stand-in for all of the elves.
Everybody who's enthusiastic.
Who come along with this, even if they had reasons that might have kept them away otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the issue of the political situation at this point is we're now 7 episodes into the season, and we've been talking about hey, we should like get some people together and fight Morgoth since episode 2. Right. I mean, technically 1, but Horin wasn't doing much about it in Gondolin. Right. So we've had the idea on the table of, hey, someone should go fight Morgoth, someone should get together and do this. The point of the summit was to see if that could start taking shape in reality. Are you going to actually get people on board? So seeing Gwindor not just be simply enthusiastic of, yes, let's go do the thing, lets us kind of see it take shape in a way that if we went with someone who's automatically on board in the way that Hurin is, it's harder to see what that means and what that looks like.
Yes. He has lots of really good reasons to decide against going. He has the example, at least, if not, order of his lord, who's not going. He has to practically defect, functionally in some sense, right, in order to go against. I mean, Orodreth gives permission. It's not like he's not rebelling, but still, it's a countercultural move that he's making there. And then, of course, he has all these personal reasons also not to go. And so him deciding in the face of all of those things, it not being an automatic decision in that way, I really like.
And it gave us an opportunity to consider Círdan's situation as well.
Yes.
Because Círdan is his own lord. He makes his own choices and has always been very enthusiastically in support of the Noldor. Unlike Thingol.
Right.
So technically, Círdan recognizes Thingol as his king.
Right.
How's that work?
Right.
So letting us see that dynamic, as well as Gwindor trying to have the same thing going on between him and Orodreth, it was a helpful parallel.
Yeah. No, I like that. Well, let's I want to jump to the C plot, because let's talk about Doriath. I've been alluding to them, but let's jump to the C plot and talk about them. So I loved the moment in the outline, and I'd love to hear you guys talk a little bit more about it, when Fingon, right, pulls them aside and says, why are you here? Why did you, like, Orodreth left, right? He was likelier to like, none of us thought that, you know, Thingol was actually gonna come, and none of us believe there's any chance he's gonna change his mind. So why have you not left? Why are you still here? I love that moment. I love that question, right? Tell us a little bit more about that scene.
So, okay. So yeah, because we need them to be a part of this because they need to hear what the plan is, right? Mablung and Beleg, if they're going to agree to do this, put their own bodies on the line, they need to hear what the plan is. So they need to stay, right? So we need to so if they do, then the audience is also going to be asking that question. So this gives us the opportunity to address that.
Yeah.
So we were being a little selfish there. But Fingon is on one hand trying to because they're staying. So obviously there's interest at the very least, right? So he's trying to leverage that interest to produce something, to move that relationship in a helpful direction. Right. Sure, he could just let them hang out and listen, and that's all well and good. But if he doesn't take an active step, he risks losing an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this is a rare moment of pragmatism on Fingon's part, but it's one that illustrates the reasons people follow him. Right. Because he's also a good leader.
Yeah, this was to let Fingon's role in all of this not get lost in this episode.
Yeah.
Because he called this council together. It's called the Union of Maedhros. It was clearly Maedhros' idea to do all of this. What is Fingon doing? Is he just setting it up and letting Maedhros do his thing, or does he still have a role? And so this shows what he's doing and what he's facilitating. And his hope, of course, is that, sure, Doriath isn't going to join. Like, we're all pretty well aware that Thingol's not going to march out to war side by side with an army of Noldor. But what can he do? And it would be super helpful if there could be travel between East and West through Doriath.
Right.
Like, the whole reason it's really hard to get from one side of the continent to the other is because Doriath has closed borders.
Right.
So that is a thing that Thingol has control over. And sure, he's not going to let just anybody through. But can there be a conversation about the movement of messages, the movement of supplies? And you can't start that conversation unless you ascertain where these guys are in this whole thing. What is their interest? What is their hope for involvement? How do they see themselves in the broader picture of Beleriand at this point? Because if Doriath is completely isolationist, then they don't care.
Right.
And they're not going to play any role.
Right. And so, as far as the Doriath people are concerned, there's Beleg, who is enthusiastic, right? He's, as has often been the case, he's the one, as the leader of the March Wardens, right? The one who works out on his own away from Doriath. He's the one who differs most from Thingol, who seems to have least sympathy with Thingol's positions and is most ready to diverge from him, as we saw in the Halath situation, for instance, right? Seeing Beleg's own changes there. Not that Beleg is not that we're trying to depict Beleg as being unfaithful to Thingol or whatever, but he does not share Thingol's convictions about isolationism, for sure.
Right. That is a pretty significant difference.
Yes.
And therefore, hearing about this grand scheme, this whole thing that's being put into play here, Beleg's
into it.
Yeah, he'd love to be involved in this. Like, sign me up. How can I be part of this really cool thing that's happening? And he knows he can't just do that.
Right.
It's not a Gwindor or Doriath situation.
Right. He does not, in fact, he would have to rebel. At least at this point, it looks that way. And then Mablung's reaction. Mablung, of course, we've always had Mablung being the general of Thingol's army. So he's the captain at home and Beleg is the captain out in the field, right? So as the captain at home, he's much more kind of invested in Thingol's point of view on things. And so he's a little bit more, hesitant or more. I mean, he's also sort of interested, but he's not as enthusiastic as Beleg, right?
Well, he's more, I hesitate to use this term, he's more conservative.
Yes.
He's more of a Tory.
Well, is
that more accurate?
He is the
king's man.
He's the mouth. Yes. He's not going to be Beleg as an independent operator out on the frontiers professionally, right? Is somebody
who is
to
having more independence, sure.
Exercising his independent judgment. Yes.
Right.
Yes. Whereas Mablung goes where the king tells him to go. That's his life. Yeah.
I mean, Mablung and Thingol play chess together, right?
Yes.
Like, so there's a friendship and an understanding that goes a little bit just beyond, well, he's my lord and I have to do what the king says. Right. So they have a bit
he's
of
a counselor as well. It's not like we don't want to depict Mablung as if he's a brainless
he's not a doormat
follower.
Or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah. He's not a yes man.
But it is true that he's more in line with Thingol's way of thinking.
He's a company man.
Yes.
Is possibly a good way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Whereas Celeborn is more. Celeborn seems. It's one of the things that I think has been really interesting in how Celeborn's character has been developing since season 4, is that he operates towards Thingol more like a peer than anyone else other than Círdan does.
Celeborn is much more interested in exerting influence over Thingol.
Yes. No, right. Nobody else really tries to influence him. Yeah. Yeah, Melian. Right. Well, fails.
Right. Exactly. Does Melian try, though? I feel like if she tried, she'd have more
Melian has developed learned helplessness on that point.
Well, I think that Melian is taking a very post-Valinor attitude towards Thingol, where it's a very like. There's a reason why the elves, if you go not to the elves for advice, for they will tell you both yes and no. She feels very strong, seems to me to feel very strongly that it would be wrong for her to overexert her influence over Thingol's will.
Yes. I mean, you can see that very clearly in the O king, you have devised cunning counsel. I mean, people give a lot of flack to Thingol for not listening to his wife. But it is true that in fairness, you could say, his wife could have spoken up a little sooner too. Maybe give that advice before he makes the decision. I mean, it's,
So agreed that if you have a lot of power, then you have a lot of ability to sway the will of somebody else. And if you exert that, you're now the villain.
Right. Yeah.
Or at the very least responsible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, with great power.
Yeah. So if she sits back and allows Thingol to make his own choices, then at the very least she hasn't manipulated him.
Yeah.
She could have perhaps influenced him a bit more, but at least she didn't manipulate him. Celeborn doesn't have that problem. he does not have Mellion's power.
He doesn't have.
So
he
he's not
doesn't-
worried about,
Yes.
well, if I try too hard, I might
Yeah.
like overthrow the mind of the king.
And we can see that he does not feel that way towards Galadriel. Like Galadriel clearly has more juice than he does,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he does not feel like it is inappropriate for him to be very clear with her about what he thinks. You know,
and
at least as far as we're telling it.
and we did see that they are in agreement that something needs to happen right now. So Galadriel
Yes.
going off over the mountains, and he's like, I should probably go check in on Doriath. His whole reason for going back and dealing with Doriath in all of this is so he can coordinate things for this coming war. So Celeborn is as on board as Círdan is
Yeah.
with
Yes.
what's about to happen.
Yes.
Yes.
But unlike Círdan, he doesn't have his own army.
Right. Right.
So he
Turns out,
has
yeah.
to coordinate with Thingol and see what comes of that.
Well, I think that Celeborn can see at least as well as anybody else the second kinslaying. Like he can see that in the cards,
Yes.
in ways that Thingol doesn't, for sure. I think that Maedhros doesn't see it as inevitable, but he certainly sees that path out there.
Maedhros is making choices to avoid
To
that.
avoid
Right.
Yeah.
And I think
But
that's
the
what
fact
Celeborn
that he
is
has
trying
to
to
make a choice to avoid it suggests that he knows
That he acknowledges
Yeah.
it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
And I
he's
think-
obviously not acknowledging it out loud, but
And I think that's specifically what Celeborn is after here, is he's trying, within the boundaries in which he exists, he's trying to craft a situation where the second kinslaying can be avoided.
And so he is, of the three of them, the one who is most willing to have a go at changing Thingol's mind about participating in this.
Yeah.
Right? Mablung is open to the Union plan, but he's not going to go back and sell out on trying to convince Thingol to do it. He's like, Thingol won't do this. Right. Like it's interesting, but Thingol won't do it. Belly is like, can I find a way to come? Like, I don't think I won't do it, but like, is it? Can I find a Gwindor path through this?
Right.
You know, that'll
Yes.
work out somehow. That seems to be where Beleg's mind is.
Right.
Celeborn is like, I'm gonna go back, and Thingol and I are gonna have some long talks about this.
I think that Mablung, in his heart of hearts, really wants to lead an army to this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if he thought there was even a chance that he would be in. I think that in our story, he sees in Maedhros somebody with whom he could be great friends had things been different.
Yes.
And so
that's really interesting, and I've
Isn't
never
it?
thought that. But that totally fits. Yeah, that totally fits.
I mean, like, I don't know how much of that parallel universe exists in the text, but certainly in our story, it's there.
And you got to think that's reciprocal, right? You got to think Maedhros is talking to Mablung and being like, I wish you were one of my brothers. Or rather, I wish my brothers were more like you. If I had a number two who was like this, like Thingol's number two, then my life would be a lot easier.
Yeah,
Right.
like it's like having Maglor only competent.
Right, like militarily competent.
Yes,
Yeah, exactly.
And like I made sure during the Dagger Bragalak to make sure that Maglor distinguished himself as as a warrior.
Yes.
and obviously he'll do the same in this battle as well. So yeah, Maedhros' frustration with his relatives is mostly about the oath.
Yes.
And everyone in Doriath's frustration with the Feanorians is also mostly about the oath and the
Yes.
kinslaying that went along with it. But
Yeah.
I mean, at the end, same difference. So I think that Mablung and Maedhros seeing eye to eye is not that much of a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but in another world sort of thing
Yeah.
where
No,
neither of them is in a position to actually get along.
Yeah. No, I like it. I like it. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. No, it's fun. Whereas, like, by contrast, Beleg and Celegorm, like,
Yeah.
Beleg is like Celegorm as he ought to have been.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, but anyway. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because Celegorm is, I would say he's, in some ways he's better.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, it's Calaquendi,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaks the tongue of every living thing.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
Huan didn't pick a
Beleg,
random stranger. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Beleg, given the opportunity and given Celegorm could not be a jerk for 14 minutes straight,
Mm-hmm.
Beleg would love to hang out with Celegorm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they could hang out in the woods and do woodsy things. And
Yes. Yes. Go
Yeah,
hunting
for sure.
together, you know? Yeah.
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 maybe.
I think
Yeah.
they could have. Again.
Yeah. Again,
In
the
theory.
whole what do you have to change to make that work?
Yes.
And yeah. And I think that Celegorm's pride is something that would definitely rub Beleg the wrong way
Yes.
Yeah.
in
for
a way
sure.
that Mablung and Maedhros aren't having that particular problem.
No, agree. Yeah, no, it's the parallel is not close in that way, and that
Yes.
that makes a really fun contrast because Beleg would be one of my candidates for most humble of elf heroes of the first age.
Yes.
Right? Whereas Celegorm
Not
comes
less,
across as
less so.
maybe went to a preppy high school and was a jock and very successful on the sports team
Yes.
that he played
Yes.
on. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, so maybe really talented, but maybe a bit of a jerk.
Mhm.
Celegorm and Caranthir both come across to me as they read their coded jock in my brain for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah. No, that.
But not just jock, like the preppy version of it.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. The jock who
but-
drives a Mercedes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. But while Celegorm is, like is like the quarterback or a kicker on the football team, Caranthir is like one of the linebackers.
Yes. 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 Yeah. Who's been praised for being brutal all of his life.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Cool. All right. So I am correctly understanding then that in this episode we are setting up future Doriath action, which is going to ultimately end in Mablung and Beleg being able to attend.
Yes.
Yes.
I've been struggling for the past like 20 minutes to remember which episode we readdressed that in. I know it's not.
There's a reason you're struggling, Nick.
Is there?
Yeah. Well,
Is it because we never got around to it?
it's yeah, sure. No, they're in episode 11.
Okay.
Okay. I think.
The one that I'm not super focused on right this second.
Right. So
Okay.
in 11 is when we deal with the entire Western Front and the beginning of the battle.
Yes, that's right.
So they should be in there somewhere.
Okay.
Hopefully we took care of it. If not, we'll just add a little footnote. Like a Mablung here.
Right.
No, I believe we dealt with their arrival.
Cool. Cool.
I'll go check that outline again. But yeah, they should be in episode 11.
Cool. Okay, so before we neglect them entirely, let's go to Young Humans in Love. So the funniest part of Rian and Huor getting together is that it seems to be to them some kind of surprise. So I say
It's
that
certainly a surprise to Hor.
yes. So I say this because in the text you get the sense there's this sense of like inevitability about it, right? I mean, it feels almost like the double marriage again.
Yeah.
You know, in the sense that like you've got the pairing of the girls and the boys and they're like paired up. I mean, that is
there's nothing about that doesn't scream this was a setup from
totally
the beginning.
like yeah, absolutely. I mean, it feels like another like a kind of an arranged marriage situation, or at least okay. It seems slighting to Huor and Rian to call their relationship like a +1 or whatever. But I mean, it's
But
it's a little bit like that, right?
yeah.
Her response to his death is the biggest thing that suggests otherwise.
Totally. That's and that would seem in the again. It's another one of those moments, right, where like when you actually look at, like we were talking about earlier, the death of Rian should not hit as hard as it does, because the justification in the text, like when we're told that Rian is so devastated by the death of Huor that she goes and lays herself down on the hill of slain and dies. The justification, like the investment in their relationship that we've been given in the rest of the text is what, one sentence? I mean, like it doesn't exist in the text. That comes out that anecdote, right? That moment of her reaction to the death comes out of nowhere, and yet it's incredibly moving. Like it's really powerful. It doesn't have any right to be, but it's incredibly powerful. So yeah, I agree. That's a really, really striking element. But yeah, the whole thing has this sort of sense of dynastic inevitability to it, which is why having it be like having that moment where, you know, she has this like, whoa, is this a date moment? And he's like, whoa, you're like a mature female and everything, right? Like, you know, like it's
so
for this to be like, oh my gosh, like this is like out of the blue, right? For the two of them. Now, look, I'm not saying that that's not believable, because that kind of thing happens all the time, you know, where like there are these moments where you're like two people who have known each other for a really long time are like, wait a second, like we can have a romantic relationship and that never occurred to us before. Like these things happen, right? Like I'm not saying it's intrinsically unbelievable, but that was the thing that kind of felt oddest about it and most difficult to handle or to execute.
So I can tell you, based on what I remember from the conversation, was that and I think that our intention here does not necessarily bleed through as well as
well, it's an outline. It's hard.
Yeah, as we might have hoped. That being that Rian is not being entirely like, she knows what she's doing. When she says it wouldn't be right for me to go with you alone, she's telling him
this is her nudge. Right.
I am. It is appropriate for you to treat me as as marriage material. Right.
You might not have noticed, but you know,
I grew up.
I grew up. Right? Did you notice that I grew up, and that actually
yes.
This is potentially a kind of a, you know,
right?
Yeah.
It would not be appropriate for you and I to go off together,
since, you know, I'm a woman now and everything. Yes. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that I feel like does not.
Gotcha.
Come out of the words on the page here.
And now in Huor's and our defense, our as viewers, she was like 14 the last time we saw her, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does this mean we have to cast two people as, like, how do we handle this? So
I believe for the casting we suggested finding an actress between the ages of like 18 and 24 to play Rian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone whom we can try to get people to believe is 14. And,
yeah.
It's hard though. It's hard. I mean, this is difficult.
It is. It is. And so in real life, you might want to cast multiple people.
But
Rion's been on screen
right.
since she was 5 in our story. So obviously 5-year-old Rion was somebody else. So at
Right.
what point
Yes.
did you swap out the actress? I mean,
You could do what they did in Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe, which was they cast Lucy's older sister as Lucy. As
grown-up
as
Lucy.
elder
Grown-up Lucy,
Lucy,
yeah.
yes,
Elder Lucy, yeah.
which
Yeah.
I think was exceptionally clever.
That is very clever. But in this season alone, in season 7, we're not really talking about like prepubescent and postpubescent. We're not talking about
No.
like an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a
No.
and a 17-year-old.
we're talking 14 through 19
Okay.
is the range that she's
Right.
gonna have
So-
mostly.
Rian earlier in the season is post-pubescent but way too young, and now she is still post-pubescent and not too young. So this really is the kind of thing that could be accomplished not by 2 different actresses, but by an actress who like wears her hair tied in ribbons in one episode and not in another, kind of deal.
Yep.
Different costume styles.
Yep.
Right. So we are asking the audience and who are to notice that she grew up
Right.
in this episode.
Yeah.
And she's the exact same age as she was in the last episode because, that happened 2 weeks ago.
Right. Yes. 6 and 7.
So-
Yes.
Right. 6 and 7 go together. So in 6 and 7 is when we're asking the viewers to recognize that Rihanna's not a child.
Yes.
And she's interested in Hur. He's
What's
good
not
looking.
to like?
Yeah,
That's not
he's
to
a
like.
good-looking young guy, and he's available, and
He's tall. He's thoughtful. He's
they're hanging out at this
insightful.
camp at Tolsirian for months at a time, and he's like the only other human her age there.
Well,
He's
and
single.
she and Morwen have been in this like sister role
Yes.
for a while, right? So
Right,
and
they're
they're not
cousins, but
sisters. They're cousins,
they
but
act like sisters,
yes,
yeah.
exactly. And so I mean, so he's also like her sister's husband's brother. Like it's
Yeah. Practically family.
practically except not. But yes.
Except not in the way that would be awkward.
not in the creepy way, but yes,
But, like,
exactly.
you know,
Yeah.
He's tall and slender. He probably plays guitar.
Oh yeah,
he's
sensitive.
a little broody.
Oh
and, you know,
yeah. Speaks Quenya. I mean, what's not to love?
Right.
So
he probably wears just a little bit of dark eyeshadow.
yeah, probably.
bit.
Yeah, just right. Yeah.
Just enough.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So basically, is this going to be a situation where Huor is literally the only one who's surprised?
He's the only one who's completely
Oblivious.
surprised. Right. Like he's oblivious in this moment.
Yeah.
Right.
It had not occurred to him to look at her that way
Yes.
Right.
before this
Because
episode.
it wouldn't have been appropriate before.
Yeah.
I have maintained throughout that she has probably been thinking of him this way for a while.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. This is
We may
not
not
new to
have
her.
addressed that,
Right.
but
No. I think we wanted her to be somewhat infatuated with him from the beginning.
yes.
And so certainly nothing wrong with 14-year-old Rian having a crush on Huor. But
And how old is he?
She wasn't. He's what?
How old is he? What's the age gap between?
he's probably like 20.
It's not huge, right? I mean,
no,
it's just
no,
a few
no.
years.
He's very early 20s, but I
Yeah.
forget exactly now. Because Turin's 4 now. So
Because so he was like 17 when she was 14-ish, right?
he was, 16 when they went to Gondolin? No, I forget all the ages now. Give me a few minutes. I'll look that up, but you guys can keep
I'm
going.
going to look up this Matilda Lawler.
That's right. Ms. Manrique is making
person.
casting suggestions. Yeah,
I already gave you the link to where that's supposed to go.
that's right.
Hang on.
Put it in the link.
But
Put
I will
put it in the
check it out
forum.
now just for funsies because I'm curious now.
We didn't cast Morwen before?
No, we saved Morwen for this season.
We saved
Like
Morwen for this season. Okay.
because
That's right.
we would
Yeah.
get into
Yeah.
her character so much now.
She looks very young. I don't know how young she is in these pictures.
Yeah.
Oh, she's 16 now. So if we were casting her right now to be filmed the next year, I would say she might be a little on the young side. But
Since we're not actually filming anything and we're therefore not putting minor actors in weird situations, it's probably not as important. But yes, if this were an actual project, I would not want to cast anyone under the age of 18 in a role where they were going to have like kissing scenes with a guy. You know, just
everybody knows that teenagers never kiss each other.
Fortunately. Yeah.
not getting paid to do so with a bunch of camera guys around them. It's a very different situation.
Totally. I'm ready.
Okay. Anyway, let me get some years for you. Okay. So let's see. Where is Hooer was born in 442 in film, and Rian is born in 450.
So it's an 8-year gap.
He is 8 years older than her.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's 26.
No, that's good. I like there being a gap. That kind of an age gap is more than enough to justify obliviousness on his part.
Yes, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But not so big as to be weird, because that's not weird.
I mean, it doesn't follow the half your age plus 7 rule.
Whose rule is that?
Just that's the at what age is it creepy?
Really?
Half your age plus 7 is.
I've never heard that.
You've never heard that?
Never. Half your age
Okay.
plus 7?
I have heard it.
Half your age
For reasons.
plus 7 is the point
Minimum age at which it's no longer creepy.
Minimum age at which it's no longer creepy.
So if you're 20,
Yeah.
half your age is 10,
Yeah.
plus 7 is 17. So a 20-year-old, 17-year-old, not creepy.
No. Of course
If
not.
you're 50, half your age is 25, plus 7 is 32.
That
It's a
seems
big age
totally
gap.
arbitrary to me.
But not creepy. Of course it's arbitrary.
No, I mean, like, how is a
Creepiness is
32-year-old
arbitrary.
more or less creepy than a 30 or a 35-year-old married to a 50-year-old? Like, I don't. It seems to me like
Okay.
that kind of a
let's put it this way.
mathematical rule
At a
seems to me to
certain
break
point-
down.
You're right. At a certain point, anything like that would break down. For
Yeah.
sure.
Obviously.
Yeah.
That's why it's arbitrary. But
I'm not sure.
Hey,
I'm not investing a whole lot in that rule.
I
That's
would
fine.
really love for us to talk about something else right about now.
sorry, no.
Okay. No, fine. That's fine.
The point is, there is an age gap. Hooer is older than her, but
Right.
whatever.
Right. No, that's fine. I'm fine with it. I mean, in my view, and especially in this kind of situation, it seems that is to say, well, whatever. This is not the modern world, right?
No,
and the modern
no.
dating scene. So that kind of
Different
a gap,
rules.
totally
Different
different
rules.
roles. Totally different roles. So
And Hoor's used to elves and Gondolin, so he's, skewed from what is a normal age to be
Totally.
looking at people
Yeah.
anyway.
his perspective totally permanently skewed by his time in Gondolin.
Yeah.
Okay. So. Okay. So she's making her move. And her long anticipated move. And he's receptive to this.
Yes. It's more that she gets his attention
Right.
and he's like, oh, right. And then notices that, okay, yeah, in fact, we have things in common and I enjoy spending time with you. And isn't this a neat development?
Right.
So,
Right.
so he's receptive and therefore continues whatever got started there.
Yeah.
But it does start with like a little bit of an awkward calling attention to things. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. There was a literary precedent that's been bothering me. Like, it's been on the tip of my brain of like this situation and the age gap and the thing reminds me of, but I couldn't place who it was.
Who
I
is
got it. Laura Ingalls and Almanzo.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's
okay.
another one. She's
That's who it reminds me
15
of.
when they get married.
It's a pretty big gap, and there's the whole like he sees her as a child, and she
Yeah, she grows up
she grows up, and then he realizes, that's the parallel that was been kicking around the back of my head.
Because I think I've read these books a very, very long time ago, but I've read them a lot. I think she's like 12 years old when they move into the town where she meets him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's already like 19, 20 years old then.
Yes.
So about an 8-year gap.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
and they're married 3 years later.
Yeah, well, we're not writing that story.
Right. No, but it's
no, that's just an actual story that actually happened.
It's exactly. I mean, that's what I'm talking about.
We're not writing that.
I'm talking about. That's when I talk about we're not talking about the modern dating game. That's one of the things that I'm referring to. You know, like it's Mm-hmm. I know we're you know, by making her 17, we're both kind of acknowledging that the time frame of this era would not have been like the modern time frame, while also keeping it within limits of modern comfort zone as well. But
it's the concept of when is someone an adult and when can they make life choices and that kind of thing. And it's difficult for people today to consider a 14-year-old an adult who could make life decisions. And having, you know, met 14-year-olds, I'm very comfortable not classifying them as adults.
Well, let's be real.
Modern
decisions being made decisions being made in late 1800s United States much simpler than life choices being made today.
Henry V was a general of armies at 16.
Right, yeah, for sure. You will be happy to know that I have checked. Almanzo Wilder was 25 years old when he met Laura, who was 15, and they got married 3 years later.
So she was 18.
So she was 18 when she got
and
married.
Yes,
however, they had been courting the entire 3 years.
I also totally acknowledge Sharon's correction that I'm thinking of TV Laura and Almanzo when I said that. Yes, I totally was thinking of the TV show version, which is the one that sticks more firmly in my mind from my childhood. I read the books and saw the show, and
I did neither of those things.
Yeah. Anyway, it's fine. Anyway, but that's sorry, that it's not hugely relevant, but that's the thing that was the example that was in my head.
Right.
In case that helps anyone else to you know, contextualize it. That's what was bothering me. Okay. What kind of I don't know exactly how to ask this question, because if I ask it very simply, okay, I will. The question that I'm basically trying to figure out how to frame is, what is the purpose or symbolic function of their relationship? Like what is the kind of freight that we're giving to their relationship? Obviously it has to happen for the two very good reasons, one better than the other, that she needs to die romantically on the Hill of the Slain, and they need to have Tuor, who's tolerably important to the future of the story. So obviously their relationship is predestined from a narrative standpoint. So obviously that's reason enough. I'm not saying we need more than that, and yet their relationship is conspicuous.
Right.
It's symbolically, because, and narratively within the shape of this season, right? Because Hurin and Morwen's relationship, very important, but that's got a whole political freight, right? To it, and it has to do with like the destinies of the houses of Beor and of Hador, and it has to do with the setting up the Turin story and everything else, right? The Huor and Rian relationship, having young romance blooming in the middle of the Nirnaeth Arnoediad season, seems really important, right? From a again, the thing I was like, I hate using the word symbolic in this way because I sound to myself like a high school English teacher, and it's no offense to high school English teachers. What I mean is like the high school English teachers that always frustrated me in high school, who talked like that and didn't seem to me to be talking sense. So again, it's not to say that that we have to force this sort of symbolic shape onto things, but
I think the story serves a few purposes beyond just being like, yes, we need to
get Tor into the
we
world,
need to get them together and married for reasons. But the whole romance with her and Marwyn was not romantic in the beginning. Like their whole reasons for getting together was very contractual, very like this is for the purpose of our people and all of that. Right. So once getting the audience on board with that, like, okay, we're having this kind of relationship. Right. That's weird, but whatever. To show, oh yeah, that's right. Like this is what it's normally like. Right. Is people fall in love and they're cutesy and then they get married and then they have babies. Like that's a normal story. So Huor and Rian are being normal.
Yes.
They're just living lives.
Right.
And being an example of the human life that will be impacted by the near knife.
Right. And that's the key to that is, again, we're personalizing the narrative to show the loss that comes as part of the near knife.
And it seems they're being normal, but they're being normal under enormously abnormal circumstances. Is already. Yeah. I mean, like this whole like, yes, our whirlwind romance at the military summit is like, that's not normal, right? That's weird.
Yes.
I'm not saying
legends
unique,
and myths stride by us.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other issue is that the overarching story for this episode is Gwindor and Finduilas, whose relationship is unraveling.
Yes.
And so if we're showing the fraught arguments of a couple, a contrast of what a happy in love young couple is. So like the young love thing is meant to highlight how poorly Gwindor and Finduilas are doing.
It's a fun juxtaposition in that way.
Yeah.
Even like the contrast that it serves of like two elves having a complicated and difficult relationship moment and two young humans figuring it out adorably and naturally, right? That's a really fun contrast in a lot of different ways. But again, there is a sense in which I think about the narrative weight that we've already talked about giving to, which Tolkien does too, to some extent, in different contexts, to the death of Lilith, right? The death of Lilith is going to have a much heavier weight in the narrative, even heavier than merely tragedy of the untimely death of a child, which is heavy enough, right? But in context, it maps onto a bigger picture of this period in time, of, the war against Morgoth. Huor and Rian are like the opposite of the death of Lilith, in a sense, right? Like they're the one positive, like the happiness arrow is pointing up for them almost uniquely in this season, until it doesn't anymore, obviously. But that's the sudden, like their story is up, and then wham, the sudden tragedy at the end. But it seems like right now, the fact that we're bringing them together, literally at the summit, like the Union of Maedhros is the name of this episode, but the only union that's actually happening is the union of Huor and Rian. Like that union, like this, it's mapped. Like we've invited that connection, right?
Yeah.
And yet the one union, which is going to lead to disaster, is very different from the other union, which is going to lead to salvation, even though it's going to lead to tragedy, but it's ultimately going to lead to salvation as well.
Because Tor is to Arendelle is to,
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's this is why I say like the relationship between Huor and Rian, it's going to carry weight. It's going to carry more weight than just, it can't just be, and we certainly couldn't treat it as simply like, and now a lighthearted, I mean, it's almost like comic relief, right? Potentially.
Right. So
like, let's do something that's not horrible.
In this episode, it is pretty lighthearted, and because it's the C plot, we don't spend too much time getting into their heads as to what they're thinking.
Right.
At some point, like perhaps in the next episode, we will have Huor have a conversation with Hurin about like, hey, so you know how elves don't get married in time of battle?
Right.
Am I really messing up here?
Right.
Like, am I doing the wrong thing? And that's like after they've announced their engagement or whatever.
Yeah.
So we are going to have Huor give voice to some of that. Like, you know, I'm not just being cute. I'm not just being in love. Like, I am thinking about the future and the choices I'm making and how it's going to impact my family. And so we'll let the relationship have some of that. And of course, the plague episode will deal with all of Dorlemon getting dragged into that, including Huor and Rian.
Yeah.
So we'll get them to the point where they get to voice more than just like, we are cute and happy and in love.
Right. But yeah, I mean the mere fact of I just from the beginning, we would need to be mindful of the weight that their relationship is going to have, the importance of it, because it's a unique thing in the middle of this. Again, Hurin and Morwen's relationship is nothing like it. Hurin and Morwen's relationship is, if anything, a kind of a vehicle for the larger political story. It's personal, you know, and about them too, but again, it's part of the whole political situation. Story. Yeah. This is the one. I mean, and when we think about it, we set this up in part at the beginning too. That is in episode 1, with what's his name? The third one.
Hondir.
Yeah, Hondir and
Beldis.
And Beldis. Yeah, exactly. So like we had this. We've already overlaid the Hurin's argument to Turgon. You know, we are humans. We can't wait forever. We need to seize the day because we don't get very many of them. Like that whole human dynamic that Hurin uses to win his argument with Turgon, right? We've already overlaid that with the question of like romance and marriage and childbearing among humans as well, with Hondir and Beldis at the beginning. And not to mention now also having doubly foreboded tragedy there with Brandir and his injury, of sorrow breaking in upon that relationship. And anyway, I like that. But anyway, so yeah, we've set this up, but Huor and Rian are then going to be like the fulfillment, the fruit of that hint. Hondir and what's her name again? Beldis, right? Beldis. Hondir and Beldis are the foreshadowing of Huor and Rian. Like they're going to be the real vehicle of that thing, and which is to say, the answer to the question that you were just saying that Huor is going to be asking Hurin in the next episode, right? No, bad, you're humans. Get married right now. Don't wait. That's definitely not. Yeah.
I just recently had a conversation with somebody about the kind of the philosophical question of having children in a world that's like the one we're living in right now. And like, you mean the super safe and pleasant one in comparison to almost all of human history,
right.
That world,
right.
People have been having babies now. Of course, granted, choices in that regard, somewhat limited. Not a lot of good family planning prior to the
Right.
Industrial Revolution, it turns out. But
Right.
people have been intentionally having children
Yes.
in circumstances that we cannot fathom the difficulty of.
Yes. Yes.
And this is certainly one like that. And yet, what do? You just disappear into nothingness?
Yeah. Well, and it's just as so hope is the theme of the season, and
Right.
Earendel is ultimately going to
Yes.
be the vehicle of that hope.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Star of Hope.
Yeah, and so Hur and Rion's relationship, like hope needs to be at the heart of that, essentially, and therefore in that way, it is, I think, like this is me doing an imagined, like I'm imagining doing analysis of season 7 of Film that I just watched, right?
Yes.
And making an argument that like really Hur and Rion's relationship is like the thematic core of the entire season, basically.
Yeah.
So if that is the takeaway you want, are you wanting more substance in this episode with their relationship?
I loved the substance that was coming. What I would want in this episode, what I would suggest in this for setting that up more, basically, or not more. So what I love about it is how it's been positioned already. That is, it's positioned both
At the council.
Yeah, at the council, right? So, I mean, again, like I can't think of anything more beautiful than to have Hurin and Rian coming together in an episode called The Union, right? Like, that's awesome. That's delightful, right? Because it's a play in a sense, right? You know, it's like wordplay, but it's really fun. Anyway, so I like how it plays there with like their romance and the whole like military political situation, and then also with Gwindor and Finduilas, right? And the pairing and the contrast there. So the positioning of their relationship within this episode works gorgeously, in ways I know we didn't entirely plan, but it's lovely the way that works out. I mean, I remember when we were discussing this back at, in the early, in pre-production part of the season, we were mostly like trying to thread the needle between when is Rian old enough and when is it too late, like when can we get her pregnant in time to have tour before, so like that's, but yet, I think it's worked out beautifully in that way. As far as like how we would want, are there particular things we would want to handle in how the relationship begins and works out? I think it's fine. Again, because I'm thinking of like, again, of Hurin's speech in episode 1, right? Which, again, in my head is kind of the answer to the question, am I doing the right thing by marrying her now? And the answer is yes, you're humans, right? Much as you're spiritually elvish at this point, who are trying to think of yourself that way, you're human, right? Anyway, so I making their relationship, the way that you have framed their relationship as this like tender, spontaneous, and very human thing. Elves don't court this way, right? This is not how, howsoever Gwindor and Finduilas' relationship may be ending here, it didn't begin this way, right? It doesn't look quite like this. And so having it have these kinds of markings of a very human, and therefore qua human, sort of, certainly from an elvish standpoint, like spontaneous, fast moving, irrational, like all of these things are things that I could imagine, are adjectives I can imagine elves applying to human courtship, right? And humans falling in love. I like leaning in a sense, sort of leaning into those things, having this be a very mortal relationship, I think is good. I mean, it's thinking about this whole thing and the future, thinking about Eärendil, that is, or rather thinking about Huor and Idril primarily. The framing of Beren and Luthien and Idril and Huor as the two elf... What?
Tuor.
What did I say?
Huor.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Who's the guy in this episode?
The guy in this
not
episode,
the one
right?
Who
Yeah,
marries
sorry.
Idril.
Apologies. Tuor and Idril and Beren and Luthien. There's both of those are like, it is important that both of them are human and elf, right? And so for Tuor to be the product of this very human relationship in this context, is to emphasize his humanity in that way, as his origin. Anyway, there are a lot of things that I like about that.
Yeah, I mean, Tuor's not the most human of humans.
Not in the end.
Not even in the beginning. He's raised by elves. So anyway.
Well,
Foster.
I mean, for like,
16 years?
Tuor, you mean?
Tuor,
Yes.
Yeah. Tuor
Tuor,
is
yeah.
very much
Yes.
a very elvish human.
Yes. Yeah.
But still human, yes. And I agree that we do want his origins to, in fact, be human.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And yes. Yeah. Both of them. Again, it's really fun thinking of the two of them, those two relationships together, because in both cases, what it means, that is, for an elf to marry a human or for a human to marry an elf, in both cases, it means something quite like there's something very different is at stake in those two things. Even just, I mean, in so many ways that the two are almost opposites of each other, right? You've got Luthien literally leaving, her elf house and elf realm to join herself to the human, and then you've got Tuor, who is accepted into the elf realm, right, in order to marry. I mean, they're symmetrical in so many ways, but opposite in so many ways, and yet both of them are fundamentally about these two different ways in which elves and humans can connect and can be joined, and what the results of those things are, and in the end, like what Beren and Luthien bring about together, not their child exactly, right, but what they bring about together is enormously important in the history of the First Age, and then what Tuor and Idril bring about is enormously important in the history of the First Age, right? So anyway. Yeah.
I mean, Eärendil is where it's at, that's for sure.
Eärendil is where it's at, yeah. With them, it is about the kid, right? With Beren and Luthien, not so much. But anyway, so I am... It's... And in the context of the Near Ninth, I think it's important. So anyway, this is great. So I'll be continuing thinking about this. But I just wanted to talk about this a little bit, because I do think it's...
If it has that much weight in the season, we want to make sure we're
I
getting
think
right.
I think it should have. I really think it should have. Okay. And it's tempting in some ways to kind of toss it, have it be a sort of a throwaway. It would be easy to go that direction because, again, at the end of the day, we just need to make Tuor, right? So, like, I could understand a different adaptation who made who basically it's like, okay, like we have to get these two together because they have to breed, right? Like for the sake of the plot. Like that's
yeah.
There's there's an angle from which that's perfectly true. But I do think their relationship itself, in the context
It
of
would
this
be
season,
dishonest if we said that was not our primary motivation.
well, yeah, I mean,
starting
we
off.
have to, yeah, exactly.
But
I mean, yeah,
what's so fascinating about how Tolkien tells his stories, I mean, one of many things, is that he takes this like necessary plot details and then gives them significance.
yes,
Yes.
So it's not just and then these people got married and had a kid, and then what do you know? This is where we are. Like, it's the whole reason we care so much about Gwindor's charges. Like, it was his actual brother who was brought out and dismembered in front of him. You're like, oh my goodness, that's terrible. And what were the chances that that guy was going to be standing right there?
right,
You know, in this whole giant battle scheme. So he puts those choices together and builds a story out of them. So we should, do the same in our adaptation of find the meaning in those pieces that have to add up for plot reasons.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. Good. Well, no, that's great. I think I like how this starts. I said I love how it's positioned, and I'll be interested to see how we move forward with it, especially as we get into plague time as well.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be an interesting challenge. But yeah, yeah. Okay, very good. Well, our next session we're continuing to plow ahead. We've been having to put off broadcasts, which has given much more time in between for development of episodes and things. So we're moving straight forward to episode 8 next time. The Easterlings come west, right? Is what's going to be going on there. So we're going to be focused back on Galadriel and Ulfast and the development of that story that we talked about before. Very cool. And it's going to be after the New Year, so that'll be Thursday, January 2nd. Will be the live broadcast of that, and then you guys are going to be. Oh, you're up in episode 12 already. Excellent. So you're going to be discussing the script discussion of episode 12. Will be on Friday, the 20th of December. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. You guys are making excellent
Nothing
progress.
shocking has happened in any of the episodes so far.
I'm so
There will
glad to
be
hear it.
absolutely
I always
nothing.
assume that when the episodes come around, they're going to be more or less exactly what we talked about before.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's. I have to say, it's really nice to be able to move forward with that kind of confidence. Like it's refreshing.
One would know our answer to a question without having to bother with asking us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, in some cases that is true.
Yeah, that's true.
Depending on the question.
Yes. Yeah. Awesome.
Good times.
Very good. Well, thanks everybody. That was fun, and we will see everybody in a few weeks for episode 8 as we begin to move. Now, are we picturing episode 8 as the sort of pivot point of the season, or?
Well, yes, in the sense that the arrival of the Easterlings in Beleriand changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, as we've done in previous seasons, having like some event that just changes everything up. That is the event. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that'll be interesting to see as we begin really to move more quickly towards the battle.
Right. Once that happens, it's like, oh, this is actually going to happen
Yeah.
now. So this episode 7, was the last time, sure, that some people were sitting around talking about this battle.
Right.
They're totally going to fight someday.
No longer. That's right. We're not just going to be discussing a battle anymore. Yes.
Yes. So well, I mean,
Okay.
maybe a little bit more.
Right. There needs to be some discussion still, but yeah.
Yeah. But we're getting closer and closer to actually putting battles on screen.
to in fact action, which essentially starts episode 10, right?
Yes.
That's the dragon episode,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That will be our.
Is it?
actual
I had
battle.
forgotten.
I thought you might. I thought that. I was chiefly trying to inform you, Nick, because I thought
Yes.
I wasn't sure you were briefed on that. So, yeah. I'd like to keep you in the loop about these things.
Right?
All right. Very good. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Nick and Marie, as always, for joining me. And I will say thanks for listening and Godspeed.